Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's now time to introduce our third guest speaker of the day. Graham William Birdsall is editor of UFO magazine and has been actively involved in UFO research and investigation for most of his adult life. His interest and motivation to explore the phenomena dates back to 1967, when he saw the first of 5 inexplicable events that have left a deep-seated impression. His efforts to broaden public and media perception about the subject led to the creation of Britain's first ever UFO newsstand magazine, which in 2 years has become the world's most widely read UFO publication. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Graham Birdsall.
Good afternoon. Are you all enjoying yourselves here at Leeds? Yes, that's wonderful. Just to reiterate what Tony Dodd was saying yesterday, it is nice to see so many familiar faces here, but it's also even nicer to recognise that there are so many people here today, and we're here Saturday and certainly on Friday night, who are experiencing their first ever UFO conference and seem to be enjoying what we've had to show and had to tell. Fascinating stuff from James Courant earlier, also from Omar. And one of the great things about having Mark come up and introduce speakers is that it's allowed me an opportunity to work with the chaps backstage and not have to wait until the videotapes come out to see what other speakers have been saying and showing. And I've been just as fascinated as you and grabbing as much time as I can to watch things from the back, although it is a little bit difficult when everything's back to front. Never mind. All right, let's kick off with the first slide, if we may. Familiar figure, Kenneth Arnold, 1947. And of course, next year, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of his sighting, and a few weeks later, the 50th anniversary of the Roswell UFO incident. And to be sure, we are going to see an awful lot of Roswell and of this subject of ours in a wide variety of mediums. Documentaries, movies, books, CDs, you name it. You're going to see it and you're going to read about it. And if it wasn't bad already, some people would be complaining, I'm sure, that we're all going to be overdosed on this subject of ours in a little over 8 months from now. Some of you, I know, can't get enough of it. Others are sick to death of seeing UFOs here, there, and everywhere else, but let's have something tangible, let's have something different. Well, hopefully over the last couple of days, and certainly today, you've seen something different. You've enjoyed some spectacular footage, those of you that were here for Moving Images on Friday night, and in betwixt all of that, we've had people like Jerry Clark from the States talking about his personal opinions and aspects of the phenomena as it's affected him, the Center for UFO Studies, and likewise Nick Pope. I'm grateful to all of those people for taking time out of their lives to come and share that information with you. But I'm really, really grateful for you taking time out of your lives. That's not my mobile, I promise you. For coming up and giving of your time. So, Arnold, 50 years, all but upon us. We heard Nick talking about governmental interest in this phenomena, going back almost 50 years to the early 1950s, with statements such as that given by Winston Churchill. What's all this stuff about flying saucers? What does it all mean? Let me have a report at your convenience. Whether or not people like Margaret Thatcher and John Major and, who knows, Tony Blair this time next year will be asking, or have asked, or will be asking those kind of questions of people beneath them, as it were, of other department heads, remains to be seen. I suspect that they will. I suspect that it's incumbent upon all those people who really want to put a little bit of pressure on those people who will be fighting for various seats at Westminster come possibly May next year, and find out their views. Don't be ashamed or frightened if you happen to be in your local shopping centre one day and you suddenly see a load of TV crews coming down following one of the political leaders. You're there. Should you or shouldn't you just go up and say, what are you going to do about UFOs? Now, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But believe you me, you're not in a minority. Every opinion poll for the last 10 years actually gives almost a 50% and more majority for those who actually believe in the existence of UFOs and the potential for there being extraterrestrial civilizations out there. Nothing to be ashamed about, ladies and gentlemen, talking about this subject openly and addressing the issues. You are in the front line. Don't be embarrassed. There's a hell of a responsibility on my shoulders and those of my colleagues, but there's even a greater responsibility on yours, especially those of you with younger children. If today's defence chiefs were to come out with a statement that Nick reiterated yesterday, that in their opinion UFOs are for real, that they're not from this planet, all hell would break loose. One of the questions which Nick didn't address yesterday is, why didn't all hell break loose at the time that Lord Dowding was telling it like he saw it? Because the media perception was Lord Dowding's probably gone off his rocker. Understandable. I have to tell you, in my experience over the last couple of years, media perception, particularly in this country, has seen a notable shift. I've dealt with numerous journalists from all professions, and not only they're prepared to listen, they're actually prepared to go out and find out some facts for themselves. And that's all we've been saying. That's all people like Bob Dean and Stanton have been saying down the years. Go out and inform yourselves. And I'm happy to report that many, many journalists, particularly young journalists, are doing just that. They are going out and they are making some incredible discoveries. The preview that we were kindly allowed to show you yesterday and on Friday night of the new Dreamland documentary, 2 1-hours going out on Sky One on the 24th and 25th of September, is brilliant stuff. But it was put together by producer Bruce Burgess, who's one of this country's leading television producers. The cameraman just happens to be Sebastian Rich, Martin Bell's favourite cameraman. This guy's been filming conflicts in Bosnia, in the Gulf War. They both went out there with a sceptical attitude as to what it was that they were doing there in the first place, but came back absolutely convinced that UFOs exist. Now, can you imagine Sebastian Rich, the next time he sees Martin Bell, or Bruce Burgess, the next time he shares a discussion with top television executives and fellow producers, what the reaction is going to be when they report that, in their opinion, there's more to this subject than meets the eye, that they've been to Area 51, that they've talked with people that are not idiots, that are sane, sensible people, spreading the message. You will not be able to see in any great clarity these documents. That's why I'm going to skip through them fairly fast. Suffice to say, I like to show a few documents because there is a history to the documents. They're important to make a few observations which, in my opinion, are very telling observations. You will see over the next few months various publications appear which, in the interpretation of the authors, cast a great deal of doubt as to what I and others have been saying about these documents is of any real great importance. You be the judge. Graham Townsend is a local man. He saw a UFO in Idle, Bradford, a long time ago. We're going back now to, I don't know whether you can see it here, April 1981. He asked the Ministry of Defence if they would kindly send him the official report as passed to them by the police. Graham reported it to the police, and it came back, and down here was something that caught our eye, and particularly this last little section down here, which actually says DI 55, Defence Intelligence 55, a distribution list which hitherto had never appeared on these documents before. We then looked back at some original documents, and we noticed a tiny little line here on practically every one of them. And it was clear from that that when they were sending out these photocopies of the reports, when they were placing them on the photocopier, they were actually covering up this section here. Perhaps it was a clerk who was on holiday, perhaps it was a temp, who knows? But it came through the net. There were all these different departments, and as we now know, DI 55, Defence Intelligence 55, was yet another tool to this government's armoury in investigating and researching UFOs. Prior to this document coming our way, the Ministry of Defence denied that there was any other department involved in the subject of UFOs. That department at that time was Defence Staff 8. Of course, it's now Defence Secretariat Staff 2A, of which Nick was head during 1991-1994. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, let's not beat about the bush. The Ministry of Defence were lying through their teeth. This document proved that lie. One of Timothy Good's favourite documents by Wilbert Smith, who was working for the Canadian Transport Ministry and was asked by the Canadian government to find out all he could about flying saucers and the American involvement in their research of that topic during the early 50s, and he reported back in this genuine document. I made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington, who were able to obtain for me the following information. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the hydrogen bomb. Flying saucers exist. Their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. That was written over 40 years ago. We hear a lot about the American Freedom of Information Act. For those of you who've never been here to these conferences before and had a look at some of the documents that come out of that act, I've selected just a few. This one demonstrates the global type of reporting associated with what is a global phenomena. Down here, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia. And I'll try and focus this a little bit. There we go. It's a little bit better. And you can see some of the agencies involved in receiving these UFO reports from the Middle East. Secretary of State, Washington. A little bit further down, you'll find a little bit further up, CIA, Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. Washington everywhere. It's a fact that every major Western intelligence agency and military agency receives information about UFOs to demonstrate further. The wonderful Freedom of Information Act has 9 exemption clauses in it, which allows those people responsible for declassifying UFO documents to literally lie about it. So it's not unusual to see huge black gaps like this. Jordanian civilians have reported seeing the lights from the western suburbs of Amman, and that's all you get to see. Occasionally, though, we have some interesting reports that come even further afield. This one, a UFO sighted in Ghana. And sometimes we have to deal with not so much hitherto classified documents, but letters. This one kindly forwarded to Nick Redfern after I asked him to make an inquiry on our behalf regarding a disclosure made by an air traffic control officer that they don't call unknown targets seen on their radar screens UFOs, but actually RPVs, remotely piloted vehicles. Now, here, London Air Traffic Control Centre Military, which basically looks after all air traffic throughout the United Kingdom and its airspace, replies back to Nick and basically denies that air traffic control operators refer to UFOs as RPVs, and that they refer to them at all. But here was a nice, interesting byline. You will appreciate that during the day there are aircraft observed on radar about which civilian and military radar controllers have no knowledge. Now think about that. That's an extraordinary admission. Here we are, from the horse's mouth, the people who are responsible for yours and my safety in those aircraft when we go off on holiday and here, there and everywhere, actually admitting that there are things flying up there about which they have no knowledge. It's there in black and white. We've heard a great deal of talk about the triangles. Some of you will be familiar with this document. For those that aren't, during 1989 and 1990, there were over 2,000 reports of these flying triangles over Belgium. We had the famous radar tape, kindly offered to the general public and the media by the Belgian Air Force, who were concerned at these intrusions into their airspace, which showed 2 F-16 fighter aircraft going up to identify one of these targets. You heard the audio tape yesterday, those of you who were here, of one of those F-16 Belgian Air Force pilots who visited us in North Yorkshire only last year, describing how he closed in on this aircraft and yet it always kept one step away. They still call them aircraft. And yet, because of this concern, the Belgian media were putting out all kinds of reports, and no different were the television services. In fact, they had something called Kilroy out there, similar to Kilroy, a TV chat show. And it was called Belgium and the UFO Issue. And down here you can actually see the name of the television program, Belgium and the UFO Issue, March TV show. This was ordinary people like you coming in and listening to UFO pundits like me. In that case, it was the Belgian and Flemish UFO researchers talking about what it was that was happening in Belgian skies. And the transcripts of what took place and what was said on that program found their way to all these agencies. Have a look at them. The Joint Staffs, Washington. Those of you who've seen the film Independence Day know exactly what the Joint Staffs are. These are the people that say whether or not this planet will survive in case of global nuclear war. They're the ones who decide whether they should invite the president to press the button. Now bear in mind, this is just a television chat show about UFOs. And the transcripts also went to these other agencies in Washington. And we work our way down, US Intelligence Center Heidelberg in Germany, Fort George Meade, and so on and so forth, Defense Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C., and a little bit further down, Ramstein, and now it gets interesting, Brussels. Oh, by the way, here we are, London, UK. Of course, our boys were interested in all of this as well. And a little bit further down, US Mission, US NATO, SHAPE. We've all heard Bob Dean, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, in Paris. The ones that oversee the defense of the West. They're receiving transcripts of this UFO television program as well. A little bit further down, the CIA in Washington, D.C., the Secretary of Defense in Washington, D.C., the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C., and here, the White House, Washington, D.C. Well, now, we've seen the reaction of the President in the movie Independence Day and what he thought about alien invasion. Here's transcripts of a UFO incident over Belgium, and it's not so much an alien invasion we're talking about an alien penetration or a UFO penetration or something. But whatever it was enough to cause real concern and alarm, and that's why that document is significant. Here's another one which is of interest to Nick, because it confuses me. Again, transcripts, not this time of a television documentary, but of a UFO conference very similar to this, but that took place in Beijing, China, on the other side of the world. July 1992. Same old distribution list. No White House this time, but have a look at them. Secretary of State, Washington, Intelligence Center, and so on and so on and so forth. And down we go down here, Yokota, Charlottesville, and Shenyang, Taipei, Honolulu, all in the Pacific area, all receiving information about who spoke at that conference, about what was shown at that conference, what was said at that conference between UFO researchers from China and also from Taiwan. But we missed something. Let's go back up that distribution list, and hello, what have we got here? MOD UK, London, Defence Intelligence Service. Now what is the Ministry of Defence doing receiving information about a UFO conference on the other side of the world? Now I suspect that the person who declassified that document looked at it and thought, harmless. No problem. I'm getting loads of calls and letters to release UFO documents. This one seems pretty innocuous to me. I'm going to send it out. But what they didn't appreciate was that that entry there would severely embarrass Her Majesty's government. Because that document, ladies and gentlemen, proves that the United Kingdom is interested in UFOs globally. Forget about Airspace UK. It is interested in what is happening with this phenomena globally. Fact, unequivocal, proof. I love documents. I like this one too. I'm not going to read it all out. Suffice to say that we've got a wonderful case that we're going to be featuring in this special publication of ours, which comes out on the 26th of September, regarding an incident in Brazil which happened in May 1986. I was fortunate, apart from investigating and researching events in Brazil which took place earlier this year, to come up with some surprising new information about a major UFO flap which took place in Brazil, which is referred to in this document. And this document, which is extremely difficult to read, basically will be reprinted so you can read it alongside that report. It talks about how the president of the main national oil company in Brazil was trying to land his aircraft in the country but couldn't because there were UFOs all over the place, and how they alerted the Brazilian authorities, and how both airborne and ground radar locked onto these targets and the jets went up, and of course they proved these UFOs to be extremely elusive. And for one poor Brazilian pilot, he had a couple of these things on either wingtip, behind him and ahead of him. And I learnt a few choice words in Brazil when I was out there in the summer, and I can imagine that this man went through the entire rhetoric at that time. Certainly this document seems to suggest that that was the case. But some quite interesting information came out of that document, and a little bit more of recent information, new information in fact, will be added to in the next few weeks. Tony spoke a great deal about Fylingdales. Of course, we don't have any golf balls up at Fylingdales anymore now. We have these things, part of the paved pause system. You can find these in Thule in Greenland. You can find them in California. And basically they're there to give us 4 minutes in which we can hide underneath the staircase, put a few pillars over our heads, and be completely safe from global thermonuclear war. That's the purpose. But they also serve another interesting purpose in that at the moment there's something like 16,000 pieces of space debris out there, everything ranging from small tiny nuts to huge chunks weighing tons. The staff at Fylingdales, which is buried deep underground, bit like Area 51 if you like, they have competitions to spot the latest satellite launch from the Russians or the Chinese and such like. There's very, very little that goes on out there, this is the point I'm making, that these people do not know about. And that's why I suspect that there may well be some revelations in the not too distant future from people who have been working at Fylingdales and other installations, as more and more information does come out from various sources. We shall see. We are in contact with quite a few people. In our current issue, and again it's a very, very dark document, I'll just try and blow this up a little bit here. I don't expect you to read this. It's an interesting piece of paper. In our current magazine, there's a little story about how the US Space Agency has thousands of documents available which actually reveal unidentified flying objects out in space. And if we're prepared to pay just under $4,000, we can have them. Well, here's one of them. I've had it for quite a while now. Gives latitudes and longitudes, and it's all computerized, numbered nonsense to me, but I'm assured by the people who've looked at it that it is genuine and that it does, in fact, indicate that there are considerable numbers of unidentified targets out there in space, and that NORAD, from where this came, are familiar with them. We do have some golf balls here in Yorkshire still, and they're not the sort that you'll find at a golf club. Menwith Hill, home of the National Security Agency in these parts, home also to peace campaigners who've been parked near there for years and years and years now. I have no problem with their presence as such, and nor do the locals. What I have a problem with is precisely what is their remit here in this country. And I'm afraid not even your Member of Parliament will be able to access that information. It is the biggest listening station in the world. Stan Friedman likes to describe the NSA as never say anything or no such agency, and it's not difficult to understand why. Let me tell you that we, that is myself, my brother, my wife, and Mark's wife, have had visits from the NSA to our office in Otley regularly. The last time one of their agency people spent 3 hours there. Whether they were there to just have a friendly chat remains to be seen. We learnt something from them, they learnt something from us. We're not interested in towing the party line. We're here to basically uncover whatever we can about this subject and do your worst, NSA. Well, we'll see. I'm still here. Beware complacency was a slide I put up at this time last year, and we were talking about all kinds of weird and wonderful things, how photographs can tend to confuse people. This one was put forward as being one of the genuine aliens recovered at Roswell. It wasn't anything of the sort. It came from an Expo expedition in Canada during the 80s. I've gone back. And then we had, of course, the Roswell footage. And then we had the interesting report by Kent Jeffrey, head of the International Roswell Initiative, which basically pointed out that experienced cameramen were convinced that that so-called autopsy footage, which we've still yet to see a single frame of, incidentally, was just not genuine. And I'm not going to talk at length about that, except to say that people like Bill Longo, Colonel Dan McGovern, who you see here, well done, Kent Jeffrey, for tracing these people. Of course, the Santilli cameraman was apparently somebody who was based in Washington, D.C. In June 1947. To this day, we're still waiting to see him, to hear of him. And it just so happened that Colonel Dan McGovern was head of the film unit at Washington, D.C. in June 1947 as well. And he would dearly love to make, to reacquaint himself with somebody that he can't really remember being there in that period of time. But what the heck, enough spent on that. Who'd have believed that I'd only spend 60 seconds talking about the autopsy footage? You can all breathe easy now. We saw Omar Fowler's reference to the British Airways 737 incident over Northern England on January the 6th last year. Wonderful incident in that it took a hell of a long time for the Joint Air Miss Working Group, that's the investigative arm of the Civil Aviation Authority, to come up with their findings. And when they did, what findings they were. Unaccessible. That's what they said about the wedge-shaped object, which was reported by Captain Roger Wills and First Officer Mark Stewart. What it could have been, where it came from, why it was there, unaccessible. And yet, here we have the Joint Air Miss Working Group in that report actually praising the two pilots for having the guts to come forward and report officially. Now, they're not alone. There have been 3,500 civil and military pilots down the years who've done just that. Risked ridicule. Risked, if you like, threats to their careers, vis-a-vis Graham Shepherd, formerly of British Airways, who suffered horrendously from senior management at British Airways for talking to people like you about his UFO experiences. Well, perhaps British Airways have toned down a little bit, because the Civil Aviation Authority did indeed praise British Airways for fully cooperating in this particular investigation. What does it tell us? It tells us a little about how ridiculous it is that we have all this super radar technology, and yet something can nearly knock a civilian airliner out of the skies above northern England, and officially at any rate, you and I are no nearer to finding out what it was. I don't believe it was a stealth aircraft. I don't believe it was a secret project from the Wharton factory, British Aerospace, near Preston. I'm not too sure whether it was a proverbial UFO from elsewhere. What I am sure is that people should be a hell of a lot more concerned about incidents like that happening in this country's airspace. There are far too many instances of this nature happening. These are the ones that we get to hear about. How many more pilots encounter something like that, and the passengers are blissfully unaware of just how close they became to being just statistics on some mortician's sheet. It's a frightening prospect. I remind you what happened in 1991 over Kent, when Captain Zaghetti, pilot of an Alitalia airline on his way from Milan to Heathrow, encountered a similar kind of incident, in that he reported a near miss with an object, and the Civil Aviation Authority and the Ministry of Defence at that time were quite happy to talk openly about UFOs and the possibilities of there being extraterrestrial intelligences and the like. I'd never seen the like. I'd never seen comments like that anywhere at any time. I thought, why is the CAA talking in these terms? Why are the MOD talking like this? And of course the tabloids were full of it. It made Zaghetti look an idiot. And yet a few weeks later, when I managed to get the official report written by Zaghetti's own hand, there was no mention whatsoever about a UFO. There in black and white, and you'll see it in the unopened files, I've published his letter, is his report, and he describes not a UFO but an 8-foot-long missile. Now think about that, ladies and gentlemen, for a minute, because that's what this captain wrote, not UFO, and the authorities were quite happy to ignore that and to prosper this UFO business. Now, had one of your relatives, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, been on board that airliner at that time, and that missile had knocked it out of the skies, I think you'd have been pretty miffed, wouldn't you? Well, I'm pretty miffed that the government is quite happy to put across this notion that we can ridicule instances like that and put it all down to UFOs. You mention a near miss with a UFO in the Houses of Commons, and most MPs will chuckle and laugh. I can just see Roy Hattersley now, spitting all over the place. You mention missile in the House of Commons, and it takes on a whole new meaning. Something to think about. And we move on to this place, Area 51. How many in this audience, I can see most of you, despite the spots, were not here yesterday or Friday who didn't see the preview of the new Sky One documentary? Just hands up. Quite a few. quite a few. Well, we'll try our best just to show a short segment before we wrap up tonight. But the film crew you saw around the corner yesterday were actually from the United States, part of the sightings crew, who did interviews with me, and they've already done Nick, and I'm pleased to say they grabbed Omar Fowler earlier on in the week, and Jorge Martin as well. And it's amazing when you talk with these people how really little their concern is in getting to the real heart of the matter. For instance, I could never picture an American television producer taking up an aircraft and going within 1 mile of that big hangar at Groom Lake, could you? Or challenging the security guards in the way that Bruce Burgess did, could you? And when I spoke about $22.4 billion spent on the Northrop B-2 flying wing in research and development alone, there were just open jaws. And I said, don't you realize, I said, that equates to $100 tax for every man, woman and child living in the United States. And what have you got to show for it? 10 aircraft. Well, 10 into $22.4 billion. In other words, what I was saying years ago seems to be coming true. It's a cut and paste job, and that money's been diverted into black budgets. It has to be. It has to be. You do not spend $2.24 billion on one of those. It's impossible. And yet it's there in black and white. So, it'll be interesting actually to see if sightings run that little piece that I had to say about it. We talk about triangles and black budgets. This is the A-12. Now, the A-12 was a triangular-shaped aircraft which was originally requested by the US Navy, but the project was dropped. I would suggest it's highly likely that, as in previous instances, this thing may be there still, but in a black budget. You see, projects like this don't come cheap. The scientists, the technicians, the engineers, the aviation experts who work on them, they spend tens of millions of dollars, and they don't like to see all that work just cast aside by the stroke of a pen by some congressional committee who says, no, 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 far too expensive, drop it, let's look at something else. I suspect that projects like that simply get shifted into a black area, away from inquiring eyes. And what is it, do you think, that produced this, which appeared 10 days ago in Flight International? The Venture Star, Lockheed Martin. Who's putting this kind of stuff together? Who now is suddenly saying this is going to replace the space shuttle? Where has the technology come from this? I don't know about you, but over the last few years we've seen some extraordinary statements coming out of the press about all kinds of weird and wonderful machines that are capable from getting us to London to Sydney in, what was it, less than 15 minutes by melting the air in front of us. Hell's teeth. You know, where's it coming from? We just seem to be racing ahead. And then suddenly things like this pop up in a weekly aviation magazine. Of course, it's not been built yet, it's not flown yet, but you can be sure that the prototypes are there, that before long we'll be seeing this kind of thing used commercially. But hang on a minute. Note that word commercially. Now, if you had something like that on the drawing board 10 years ago, and it looked fairly elaborate but feasible, what do you think the people at the Pentagon would say? I like that. We could do an awful lot with that. Black budget. Believe me, it happens. I spoke with so many people, not just here but in the United States, and it does happen. So what you see flying about the skies now, we're told, is nothing. That the United States, in aviation terms, is 20 years ahead of everything that you see flying today is one of those flying up there? Is there more than one? Who knows? But the picture's released, it's out in the open, and we all now know that there is such a thing as the Venture Star, or there may well be, before too long. When we talk about skeptics in this subject and debunkers, it's one thing to debunk this subject, it's another to debunk whatever it is that's being said at the minute now about that chunk of Martian meteorite found in Antarctica. I was asked to comment about that, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, and there were other people talking about it as well. Good old Patrick Moore called me several sandwich layers short of a picnic again. And, you know, conspiracy theorist and God knows what else. And yet, somewhere down the line, in recent years, I think you might struggle to probably find any reference to a Patrick Moore proposition that life existed elsewhere outside our planet Earth, indeed in our solar system, and it's just nonplus Patrick and most other people. James was right. People have known about this Martian meteorite for a number of years. The timing is significant. Make no mistake about that, the timing is significant. And I think you will quickly discover over the course of the next few weeks and months more strange revelations affecting NASA and planets and things even further beyond our solar system. See, it's less than 3 years since the Hubble Space Telescope discovered the first planets outside our solar system. Now, for most of you, and indeed for most people around the world, it didn't come as a big surprise, because for most people we already accepted the notion that there must be planets outside our solar system. So big deal, the Hubble Space Telescope has found planets. A year ago, we find more, and less than a year ago, we discovered that they may have water on some of these planets. Now, where there's water, there's life. Where there's life, there's all kinds of possibilities. And gradually, the light-year distances on some of these planets, the nearest one is 40 light-years away, they're becoming increasingly closer and closer and closer to us. And hopefully I'll get time to just speculate a little bit more about that and throw in 1 or 2 comets of interest which are coming our way as well. It's a wonderful thing that Martian meteorite, although there are still people in the scientific community who don't believe that that little squirrely thing there, that incidentally the little segment is the chunk of rock, is the harbinger of life and entirely 100% evidence that life existed there. But I made a comment to a journalist in the Yorkshire Evening Post when we were up on the moors near Skipton the other night, which I was really pleased that she included in her article. She had a go at me for not remembering me north, me south, me east, me west and east and all. It was midnight, we were tired. But I did find it interesting that all the world's media and attention was focused on this chunk of rock, this tiny little worm-like creature that was billions of years old, and yet that very same week we were literally destroying 5,000 frozen embryos. To me, that's sick. And I don't want to get into debates about abortion or anything else like that. That's just a personal opinion. But when you throw away, when you create life, and you discard it, just like that, and then you focus such attention on a chunk of rock that's billions of years old and say, life! There's something wrong somewhere. Something wrong. We had Richard Hoagland here earlier this year, and I can tell you that there are moves afoot to really mount a big, strong campaign on both sides of the Atlantic to impress upon the media and the politicians that some of these impending probes to Mars, 3 of which go out at the end of the year, 2 from the United States and 1 from Russia, should really take a close look at this region of Cydonia. Of all these 3 probes, they have 150-odd mission profiles, and not one, ladies and gentlemen, not one, despite NASA's insistence that on their 2 probes they're going to be looking at the really most interesting features on Mars. Not one focuses on Cydonia, where you have strange face-like impressions and pyramid-type impressions. Something wrong. Something very, very wrong, that should be so. Indeed, the next probe that will reach Mars in 2002 will be the first that will actually do some digging and soil sampling. And when you find structures like this on a planet in your own solar system, is it the kind of stuff that you should ignore? Should not NASA, should not the people who can make an impression on NASA say, well, I've seen this thing, and it looks damn weird. It doesn't look a natural formation, and yet it's there from your earlier missions. Don't you think you should have a look at this more closely and in more detail? I think so. Now, I'll stop the slides there because I'd like to just show some videotape for you, if I may, and we'll come back to the slides. It's about 10 minutes of videotape when we've shown that. We can knock the slides off. Okay, and we can get the volume up. Can we start the tape again, guys, please? I'll just take it back to the beginning of there. And if we can just drop the lights down on the lectern as well, if possible. Thank you. This is a geyser. And the reason why I've shown this little segment of footage at the start, it's something I shot out in Iceland with Tony that I've never had an opportunity to. I mean, we've shot lots of footage. But I wanted to just impress upon you, when Tony talks about what's happening out in Iceland, just how rugged and barren this terrain is. It's a volcanic island. This is the area, incidentally, where Neil Armstrong and the Apollo 11 astronauts trained for their walk on the moon. That's how rugged and alien this terrain is. There are huge natural waterfalls and crevices. It's a huge country, but it has a population of only 250,000. Its prison population, at the last count I'm told, was 48. It's an expensive country to live in, however. Coca-Cola is £5 a can. But if you ever see a country more beautiful and a people more spiritual, I defy you to find them. That was Cecilia Dean on top of one of the hills and ridges, and this is the area in question. We took an organised trip out there a couple of years ago to Reykjavik. We advertised it in the magazine, and we saw some of the most spectacular country you can imagine. Along with us on that journey, apart from Tony and our wives, were Bob and Cecilia and Virgil Armstrong and Wendell Stevens and quite a lot of other well-known UFO researchers. And here are all the lava banks. This is all lava. There is not one single tree on Iceland, anywhere. And in the distance, this incredible mountain where all of this UFO activity has been taking place. Just see the back of Bob's head there. And it's only a short piece, but you just get a very, very brief glimpse. There it is, in the distance.
Okay, it's an extreme.
Now, another trip I took was out to Area 51, and here you can see a typical road sign. This is in Las Vegas. And if you missed it, it says Area 51 Extreme Party. It's a sex club. But it's synonymous, if you like, with the whole area. It's Area 51 this, Area 51 that, and of course now we have the extraterrestrial highway. We all thought this might be unusual when we were travelling down that way. It turned out to be a hot air balloon. Important to bear this one in mind. There are hot air balloons all over the place. in and around Las Vegas. And this is Nellis Air Force Base, filmed from the actual main highway. But the testing ground goes, of course, thousands of miles off into, sorry, hundreds of miles off into the distance away from the area. This is our little nighttime trip, which we took out to Groom Lake Perimeter Fence. There's the famous Steve Medlin mailbox, which was picked out by Bob Lazar when he was being transported down this very road for the first time into the Groom Lake facility, where he saw, he alleges, alien sources being back-engineered by American technicians and scientists. And we got as close as this to the perimeter fence. Note that I'm as far away from the perimeter fence as possible. And I just happened to pan my camera, and I thought, what's that? And then that came on, and the famous security camo dudes patrol was there.
Well, that's certainly closer than 10 feet.
Still the headlights.
This is the sign back here.
Look at here. It's closer than 10 feet. There's lights over here. I know. And here he comes.
We were told that the nighttime
They're too
desert
close.
conditions out in Nevada would mean that we would have to take extra thick
They may be
coats,
too close
woolly
to
jumpers.
find out.
You
know?
Get back!
They're just soft. We went out there in jumpers. It was really warm. They were wearing woolly muffins around their ears. You know? Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada. A wonderful place. Yeah, a photograph of Bob Lazar, and they've got pictures of UFOs that have been taken around the area as well. I tried to focus in on this. We stopped off here, and then we went back and we looked at some curious objects through night vision binoculars, and we had a great time actually. And the skies out in Nevada, you have to see them to believe them. I mean, literally, the entire Milky Way is there. It's like being in one of those planetariums. Not a wisp of cloud, millions and millions and millions of stars. Wonderful place. And you can see all the kind of UFO paraphernalia. That's Chuck Clark, who's a real pain in the backside for those responsible for ensuring security at Area 51. He's taken a load of photographs, some of which we've used in the mag. And this is the local idiot. You won't like me for saying that. I won't reveal his name, but he's actually somebody that came up with us, and he was posing for this lady here on the left, Carla from the Los Angeles Times. Now, recent trip to Brazil. We literally travelled through the night with Varig, and I decided to put on the old camcorder, just a short segment this, and I'm looking out at the area. First time I put it on, and I spotted something. And I think we're looking up here, fellas. You're really going to have to... Here's the mountains in the distance. And we're going back up here. Can you see anything there? There. Very, very small, and we were going to try and get a blow-up of this for you for today, but Russell has been concentrating on a lot of other things, and you'll see a better one. What it was like a tiny cigarette stood up on its end, travelling across the horizon, like so. And I will get a blow-up of that and put it in the magazine for you so you can get an impression. It's a bit difficult on this size, and because of the lights I can't even see it. We travelled down from Rio across the eastern coast to Curitiba, and hopefully you will be able to see this thing. There we go. Now this was just like a silver ball, and this is on the morning of the opening day of this Brazilian conference, and I kept it in vision for several minutes. You're only going to see a short sequence of it here. But as you can see, it was attracting the attention of, I mean, it's a hell of a distance away. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning, June the 7th. And it's already started to attract the attention of other people, just there. And here's John Carpenter filming it for the United States. And it is a bit difficult to pick out on this screen. We're looking, I think that area, there we go, there it's there. And this travelled ever so slowly. Some people said weather balloon. Well, for a weather balloon it went across and then out back and zigzagged a little bit and then away. Some of the Russian triangular footage now, very quickly. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I've got half an hour and I think I'm more or less on time. We were digging through old archive footage and this is the kind of stuff that's been filmed out in Russia. Can we turn the sound up a little bit, fellas, please?
Это только одно из многочисленных свидетельств, но их столько. Сотворено ли оно разумом?
You've already seen this via Tony, these triangular shapes with some of the Belgian footage. You have an impression of some of the stuff that's been captured on footage elsewhere via Omar. Can we pause there? Here we go again. This was filmed off the southern coast of England. Object here to the left, triangle to the right, and play. And as the camera pans across, stop. No, back a touch. We can just pause it there. No, back a touch, fellas. Why me? It's gone so smoothly for everybody else. Right, can we play now? And when it goes across, no. All right, forget it. Never mind. UFO Awareness Group, 2 of their representatives in the audience today. If we can play now, gentlemen, please. We'll just run through. Short sequence filmed at the Skywatch weekend, 17th, 18th of August. Again. And if you can get a decent pause on that, I would appreciate it, please, at some stage. It's gone in the trees. There. Now, what's interesting about this fella is Russell's had a look at it and he's pretty much convinced that we're looking at an aircraft here because at some stage you see a kind of a strobe light. The 2 gentlemen who are in this audience today, who travelled all the way to Leeds just so that they could see that we're showing this footage, I mean, to be fair, Russell still has to do a fair old bit of analysis on this. If we can, just still pause forward so we can catch that other light, or maybe you have to go back to the start of the sequence in order to do so. Be patient with them because it is interesting. It's not easy back there because the lights are down. And pause. That'll do. Remember what Omar was saying about the 3 lights on this triangle, and yet you have a kind of a smaller light near the front end. Look what we have here. 1, 2, 3, there. Now, the people on this Skywatch are absolutely insistent that this thing never made a sound. Indeed, the only sound you can hear on the videotape, it only runs for several seconds because they dashed away, got their camera and everything else, is passing traffic. Now, is this some kind of stealth aircraft or super secret Aurora or whatever? Who knows? The beauty about the fact that that film footage was taken in the first place is because it was payback time, if you like, from just one group of many, many dozens who all participated in that Skywatch weekend, which was terrific, and those of you who I know are in this audience who either did the Friday, the Saturday, or through the Sunday, I thank you for that, because it just shows you what can happen when you get organised and you get out there with your cameras, and a wonderful job, and the reports will all appear in our November-December issue. Okay, let's just run the rest of the videotape, please, gents. You can actually see for a brief second the strobe, and I mean it's literally gone. Right, this is just a short few seconds of footage that I shot in Curitiba. This was a gentleman who was one of the special guests there, a 92-year-old abductee. There was people like Travis Walton there talking about his experience and his new book, Fire in the Sky, which is a hell of a read, I recommend it. And then we have this, a presentation by two Brazilian researchers into an incident which allegedly took place on the 20th of January in Varginha this year. And they were showing these photographs and slides. Now, we'd already spent 2 or 3 days talking with researchers and people who were there, that is Stanton T. Friedman, John Carpenter and myself, to discover as much as we could about this extraordinary incident. I can tell you that the two gave a very, very polished presentation on that stage, and that's the video. So let's get back to the slides and just very quickly take you through this sequence. The story itself is not so straightforward, in that there had been a build-up of activity in and around the Varginha district prior to that incident on January the 20th. It is as detailed and laid out as best I can in the current magazine. I was literally having stuff translated for me 15 minutes before I flew out of Curitiba and on to Sao Paulo for the return trip. But I think the information is there, and let's just take you through a few of the personalities. This is Paccaccini, Rodrigo Paccaccini, I believe his first name, who I photographed in John Carpenter's hotel room. Next door to me there was Stanton Friedman, and this was at the start of a 2-hour interview. We got it all on tape, in which he gave us even more details about this extraordinary case that had occurred in Varginha. Gentleman in the red sweater is Aurelina Augusta, and to the right, Mr. Eurico de Freitas. And that little girl is the gentleman in the red sweater's daughter, who saw this UFO just a few days before the main incident. Now, in the red sweater again, Aurelina Augusta, and to the right, Mr. Eurico de Freitas. Now, this is a couple who were woken up in the early hours when their horses were obviously panicking. They went out and they saw what the lady here described as a flying submarine. This cigar-shaped object traveling across the crops. They both saw it, and the dogs were barking a fair old bit. And the description tied in exactly with that drawn by that little girl a week or so previously. Now, the gentleman in the center of the photograph here is a famous Brazilian journalist, Gualat de Andrada, speaking with the farmer and Aurelina. And on the right, there's our friend who you saw a picture of earlier, Rodrigues Paccaccini. I did get it right. Here they are again, ordinary farming couple with a couple of their dogs. 20th of January. A creature is spotted, a strange creature, down there in the woodland. This is looking down on the site. And this is the same spot where people saw this creature from. This is number 3 Switzerland Street in the Jardim André district of Virginia, and just to the left of there is where fire trucks from the city fire department and the military were parked. Again, this is looking down at the side of this first encounter. Gentleman on the left in the white shirt is Franco Rodriguez, and Claudia Cova is there on the right. In the distance, that's a colleague standing more or less where this first creature was seen. Again, you can see the steepness of this slope looking up to where the trucks were parked. And this is, the Brazilians love to use artist impressions for all of their reports, and this is exactly what happened, according to eyewitness testimony. The fire officials, you see, are called out for any kind of strange animals and dangerous creatures throughout Brazil. I mean, my God, they have all kinds of weird and wonderful creatures out there. A few of them I managed to see myself in a local zoo, which is right opposite the venue where we held a conference. This strange creature's seen. So the firemen climb down this steep slope, approach, and they throw nets over it, and it's carried up the brow. They place it into a wooden box, the military arrive, the military take it away. Those military, incidentally, are from the Escola de Sargentos de Armas, ESA. It's the local militia. This is the headquarters, a very dark picture, I'm afraid, of the Varginha City Fire Department, Corpo de Bombeiros de Varginha. Difficult words, I know, but I'm sure if the Brazilians get a tape of this, they'll appreciate it. Not if I get any of their names wrong. Again, a darkened image, but this is the rear of number 76, Bonavento Braspeira Street, where the second creature was spotted at 3:30 p.m. on 20th of January. Second creature in the afternoon. Well, calls placed about 8:30 in the morning. The Virginia City Fire Department come and get the first creature at 10 o'clock that Saturday morning. Everything's then rosy and quiet in the garden, so to speak, and another call comes in. 3:30 p.m., 20th of January 1996. And this is the exact spot where this creature was seen crouching very, very close to the building. And if you look very, very carefully, you can see a Brazilian researcher in this picture adopting that crouched position just there. Battery's failing on the old laser, never mind. And these are the 3 girls who saw it. Liliana Fatima Silva on the left, Alkira Fatima Silva in the middle, both sisters, and Katia Andrada Zavia point to the precise location where they saw the creature. They saw it, and they ran like hell, thinking it was the devil, to their mother. And that's an artist's impression of this creature. 3 raised humps, brilliant red eyes, arteries, veins that were all over its body, but more pronounced at the back, and it had a kind of a brown, oily smell. This is the mother and the 2 daughters at a press conference. And here, Obriara Franco Rodriguez, one of the researchers, holds up a drawing of the creatures made by Liliana Fatima. And you can see the 2 eyes and the 3 raised humps. Guys, I'm going to have to ask you to press the forward on the slides, I'm afraid, because the battery looks like it's gone in this remote control. I'll keep trying. Here's a close-up of the drawing made by Liliana. Seem to have got it now. Now, they held public meetings immediately after this incident, and members of the public and other eyewitnesses attended the press conferences that were called as well. Rodriguez Pacacini is seated on the left. Now, all of these people who attended here saw what was going on. Every one of them. They all had something to say. Well, we saw the fire truck, well, we saw the military, we saw them throw the nets over, we saw the kids throwing stones at the second creature. They were laughing. They were throwing stones at the goddamn thing. You know, I mean, it was just unbelievable. It's the kind of stuff, this was, I mean, Rodriguez speaks perfect English, and he was telling it just as I'm telling it to yourselves. Some idea of the media attention in January of this year, shortly after the incident. Did you see any film clips, news images, stories coming out of Brazil in January, February this year? No, I didn't either. Next slide, please. Here's Harvard Professor of Psychiatry John Mack, who was called down by 2 medical colleagues who were alerted to this incident. And he said, if these girls are making this up, then I will tear up my psychiatry qualifications and diploma and burn them and walk out. Next slide, please. Here's a team photograph, and guess who's not looking at the camera when the picture's taken, but decides to read a magazine himself? Instead, John Mack. And the next slide, please. What happened to the second creature, we're pretty sure of. What happened to the first, nobody knows for certain. The second creature, the one that was captured at 3:30, for some reason the military decided to take it to the front entrance of Varginha's regional hospital. The front entrance, ladies and gentlemen. And that's a picture of the regional hospital in Varginha. No wonder they've accumulated over 60 witnesses, eyewitnesses, to this particular incident. Then on Monday, the 22nd of January, a convoy of trucks parked here on this very road spot between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock opposite Humanitas Hospital. Why Humanitas Hospital? Why not the regional hospital in Varginha? That's because the doctors at Varginha looked at the creature in that regional hospital and said, we can't treat this, we're not qualified, we don't have the equipment. So they took it out and they went to Humanitas Hospital. This is the story. Here's one of the researchers, Eduardo Pascador, outside the side entrance to Humanitas Hospital, where a truck drove in to retrieve the second creature and deliver it to the military school. That's the ESA, Escola de Sargentos de Armas. And this is an artist's impression of the scene inside. Now, if you look at the magazine, you will see that we have identified every single one of those military people present. Their names, their ranks, they're all known. There are at least 7 interviews on camera with some of these people who were present. And all of that information has yet to go out. The guy, incidentally, who videotaped all of this scene for the military was identified as a Sergeant Pedrosa of S2 Military Intelligence. The military truck was then seen by nurses and doctors and even people working in the catering department parking up to the hospital doorway to remove this second creature. And then at 4 o'clock on the morning of Tuesday the 23rd of January, a convoy of military trucks and private vehicles left Varginha for the Escola Preparatoria de Cadets em Campinas. That's the Army Cadet School at Campinas. Not predominantly cadets, it's one of Brazil's biggest military bases. I believe, if memory serves me right, I think I've said about 350 kilometers away. Even the detail of the front truck there on that convoy was noticed by people. You know, it was a Volkswagen van. And this is General Colio Lima, commandant of that Cadets em Campinas, and the man who has ordered a massive security clampdown. Rodriguez Paccaccini, the principal investigator, for sure, has to walk around now with a bulletproof vest around him. If anybody utters his name in public, that is the military, they're given an immediate 10-day detention. He is not a pretty man. I mean, look at him. You know, I mean, it's a hell of a country. I mean, it really is. It's. I took Christine with me, and she was pretty frightened, to be honest with you, when we got into Curitiba. Our plane had been delayed, nobody was there to meet us, nobody spoke English, and the military are everywhere. I mean, they just handle Tommy guns and machine guns and pistols like you wouldn't believe. You know, I fully expected somebody to start twirling a pistol around their finger at one point. And the other disturbing feature which we saw out there was that everywhere, on every street corner, you know, there's just thousands and thousands of posters of missing people. And of course, kids. And it was a pretty harrowing time at different moments on that visit. Three of the guys, researchers, who deserve a mention. Obiaro Franco Rodriguez on the left, Edison Jr. in the center, and he's alongside on the right, Louis Petri, who's done more than most. He's a TV journalist. He works on a program called Fantastico in Brazil to get this information out. That is actually a shot, a still frame from a video of one of the interviews that Rodriguez Paccaccini did with one of the key military witnesses to this particular incident. And then, after it had seemingly all died down, here we had this Mrs. Teresino Gallo-Klepf, who, in April of this year, 3 months after this main event, April the 21st, saw this. Here's a drawing held up by researcher Claudia Covo, made by Mrs. Klepf, of this creature that she saw on the 21st of April. Now you can just make out the Brazilian researcher standing there, and at the back of this restaurant area here, she just nipped out for a cigarette. This is where she observed the creature. This is at the rear of Jardim Zoological de Varginha. That's the Varginha Zoo Gardens restaurant. And then you had things like this. I mean, UFO researchers are used to ringing up people. Brazilians go some way beyond that. They literally printed thousands of these leaflets, and this actually says, if you have some information about this case, talk with us. Obrigado, thank you. And they were shoving them in doorways, they were putting them up on walls, and of course people were ringing the number. Yes, we've seen this. But think back to what Mrs. Klepf saw. Here we are, incident happens on the 20th of January, and we go through February, we go through March, we're into April, back end, and she sees another creature. And of course the questions then that were asked were, are there more creatures like this in and around the area that haven't yet been found, or has somebody come back looking for lost friends? Who knows for sure? This is the front cover of a Style magazine, and it actually says The Mystery of the Brazilian E.T. Now this was published on the 22nd of May 1996, and still word has to carry about the significance of this incident, which I literally have just scraped the surface of in this presentation. It's an important case in my opinion, and it's something that is shared, I believe, by Stanton as well as John Carpenter, in that the quality of the witnesses and the sheer numbers of the witnesses left a deep impression on all three of us. We were extremely impressed by the fact that the Brazilian investigators who went out there and literally knocked on doors did so immediately after this thing happened. It's not as if we're looking at another Roswell incident. We don't know for sure. Certainly there are witnesses who claim to have seen trucks coming out of Varginha with strange looking wreckage on the back. They're hoping that there are some souvenir hunters out there. Certainly there is evidence that the Americans that were there in a very, very big way, some of which I've touched upon in the magazine. They've taken a real blatting of these researchers from armchair ufologists. I hate to use that word ufologist at the end of armchair. People who haven't traveled there, who have never met Paccaccini and all these other guys, wonderful men and women, has to be said, who've bent over backwards to literally share every snippet of information that they possibly could. And their message that was given to me, to Stanton, and to John, they asked to pass on to you. Please believe us. We are not amateurs. We go out in the field, and they stress this point again and again and again. We are field researchers. They have the interviews. They have a hell of a story to tell, and I'm proud and privileged to be able to pass that story on through the pages of our magazine and, of course, here at this conference today. And I really, really hope, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, that it won't be too long before we're able to bring some of these people across from Brazil and stand them here and let them tell you their story, because it is a heck of a story. Moving very quickly on to, that's another artist's impression. I wanted to just touch upon something else which has been mentioned by Mark earlier, and which we only literally got this photograph put onto slide yesterday. It was taken by a gentleman called Mike Page in Hawaii in the back end of 1989, and he's out there as a tourist in Hawaii. These things down here are toilets, I believe, and here is this huge mountain, and he's taken a scenic shot, and this is what appeared. Now, I don't have a blow-up, but you will get a full technical appraisal of that shot in the unopened files. It is something that Russell travelled all the way down to London for to retrieve last Saturday, and he came back with the negatives as well. And believe it or believe it not, we now know that this man was taking some cinefilm at the same time, and we're having a close look at a lot of the frames of that as well. It is, according to Russell, the creme de la creme. Those of you who were fortunate enough to see Russell's 30-minute presentation on computer enhancement and analysis on Friday night will know that when he comes out with a statement like that, it carries some weight. And believe you me, if you'd have seen him on Saturday night when he came back with the negatives and the pictures of this thing, I mean, it was like Christmas morning. I mean, he was just hopping up and down, and he couldn't stop. I mean, he was really excited. And I share that excitement, we all do, because this thing is huge. And believe me, when you see the blow-ups, as you will when Russell's finished with it, and they're finally published, you'll know exactly what I mean. Well, I've got just over 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, and I wanted to wrap up by just taking a very, very quick few minutes to recount on some of the things that we learned via the likes of this man, Robert Birdsall, and of course Graham Hancock, when they were kind enough to grace this theatre with their presence alongside Richard Hoagland back on June the 1st. I was immensely impressed, not only by their presentations, but by their work. I'm sure many of you here have seen the film Stargate. It was based on the work and findings of people like Robert Birdsall, who correlated the pyramids that you see here on the right with Orion, and using a computer clock went back 10,000 years, and there are the chambers in the Great Pyramid, and they align perfectly with Orion. Read the Orion mystery. Read Fingerprints of the Gods, because this is something that is important to me, and it's important, I can assure you it's important to all of you here as well. Some of these images that they kindly shared with us, and which we were able to film, of course, are absolutely stunning. They do tell a tale, and it's something that strikes a real chord with me. I've mentioned discoveries by the Hubble Space Telescope. We've also heard about strange underground workings and the like that are happening in this country, and they're happening out in Australia, and they're happening out in Russia, in the Caucasus Mountains, and they're happening across the United States. And let's just back to this one here. A year ago, I was at the Leeds Civic Theatre, and I can definitely do this in 2.5 minutes. I sat on a stool because I'd got a bad back. I'd had an encounter with 3 discs. They were 3 discs that were removed from the back of my spine, actually, and that's why I couldn't stand up. Fortunately, I could stand. But it was important for me to tell people about this remarkable discovery of the comet Halley-Bopp. And I said at the time, a year ago, here in this city, that it seemed extraordinary that 2 amateur astronomers could pick up something 1,000 times bigger and brighter than Halley's comet almost in our back door before we heard of it from any of the major observatories. This, to me, made no sense whatsoever. Let me just say this. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am as down-to-earth and as level-headed as most people, but I do find it extraordinary that this same Hubble Space Telescope has not released a single photograph to members of the public since October last year, and yet this is going to be the brightest thing to enter our solar system in the history of mankind. And by April the 1st next year, it will be the brightest daylight star you and I have ever seen. Daylight star, ladies and gentlemen. It will be there in our skies, in broad daylight. 1,000 times bigger than Halley's comet, and yet nobody knows where it's going or seems to know a great deal about it. I find that extraordinary. I find it extraordinary that some kind of elliptical object is doing strange orbiting things around the sun. But there we go. Keep your eyes out and your ears pinned firmly to the ground for these nocturnal space objects. I'm extremely suspicious about NASA, and I'm extremely suspicious that we can have objects almost blow our planet to bits, as this near miss with the asteroid did back in May, just a few months ago, and yet we're only given 4 days' notice. It doesn't make sense at all. I could go on some considerable time about that, but I won't. All I will say is that I'm still as confused as ever, that we still keep finding fossil bones millions of years old, and yet we still cannot seem to find our history, which goes back 15,000 years, which is a drop in the bucket. And to coin Bob Dean's old phrase about who we are, where we come from, why are we here, I think there's still a hell of a lot more to learn and a hell of a lot more interesting things to discover. And hopefully you've enjoyed what I've had to say, and we'll discover a little bit more with Santiago Garza's lecture in about 15 minutes from now. Thank you very much indeed.